Hey guys, it's David from 3D Make It, and today we're going to be talking about resin 3D printing. Let's go. Just before we get into the resin 3D printing video, I wanted to announce a contest. We already have the information up on our website at www.3dmakeit.ca. You can go there and check it out, and we did announce it on the YouTube channel feed last week. Now, the contest is for making a bauble, a tchotchke, a little ornament for the season of the holidays coming up. Whatever you decide to do is great. There's some specifications on the file size and format, but all of those are in the contest rules on the website, so check out 3dmakeit.ca. 3D printing. If you came here, you're probably thinking about resin 3D printing. Maybe you just started resin 3D printing, or maybe you're doing it and you wanted to check out a sweet video on resin printing. Well, you came to the right place. So what is resin 3D printing? On our channel, up until now, we've talked a lot about FDM or FFF 3D printing. That's a filament that gets extruded through a hot end and pushed onto a build plate, and it just goes over and over and over and over and over, and we've done a lot of that. Now, resin 3D printing actually is pretty old in itself too. There's a few different ways. There's SLA and there's DLP and there's sintering for metals and other purposes as such, but today we're going to be talking resin. Now, the resin 3D printing that we are going to talk about is GLP. So that's a light projection that cures the resin. Now, there are laser versions of resin printing where a laser traces the picture onto a screen in a vat, and that'll make sense in a second. But we're going to be talking DLP, resin 3D printing, and in general, the accessibility of it, the cost of it, what to do with it, should you do it. So let's move on. So DLP 3D printing is really accessible, and take that with a grain of salt. So when we look at an Ender 3, or we look at another, say, Ender 2 Pro that I've been looking at for a while here, but we look at these printers and they're FFF. They're standard filament machines. They start around $160 and they go up to about $340. Now, I mention them first because resin printers are incredibly price competitive. So when you're looking at a resin printer, you can look at, say, a Creality or an Anycubic or even an Elegoo Mars. Now, these printers all share the same technology. They're all DLP based. So they use a screen, just like your cell phone screen, to project a picture through a vat of goo. So when it projects the picture, it shows the resin UV light, and that light is actually what cures the resin layer by layer. So the build plate will dip in and pull up, and dip in and pull up, and every time it dips in and pulls up, a new layer will be attached to the print. So it's not dissimilar, but instead of stacking layers with an extruder moving around in a circle or a square, whatever the shape it's building, this is actually curing an entire layer at a time by flashing the picture and then going next and next. So resin printing can be incredibly fast compared to FFF or FDM printing. Now, it does take a little bit longer in some respects. So when we talk about who should resin print, well, if you print a lot of benchies or you print a lot of functional items like phone stands or brackets or parts for your 3D printer, like many people enjoy doing, these things can be printed en masse with strength on a FDM printer, no problem. Now, one thing that the FDM printers lack where the resin printers shine at is resolution of prints. So you can get down to a finer micron, usually 0.015 or better on some of these resin printers, and you're going to get less layer lines. Optical clarity is there. You can print absolutely clear things almost if you want. Now, these are great advantages. They're things that a FFF printer will never be able to do. Printing clear is actually pretty hard for an FDM printer. And resin printers are really good at replicating parts and other devices that you would need to maybe attach a fan duct to your printer. So there are really good use cases for that. However, might not be as it seems. So let's jump into the cost of resin printing first. So resin printing Still comes down to a print station, but you're going to want an additional piece or at least a few pieces of hardware to go along with it. So the actual resin 3D printer, lots of them have high resolution screens, 2K or 4K now. Monochromatic screens, so meaning monochromatic, they can do white or black, and those screens can actually cure the resin faster. They're more efficient. So these are features that resin printers are coming with now that are pretty well standard. So what about cost? Well, if you look at any Cubic Photons, Elegoo Mars, or the Creality Halette series, you know, these printers are all going to come in around the $300 to $400 range. So they're not dissimilar to an FDM printer cost. Black Friday is coming up. You can get them ridiculously cheap. You could score deals as low as $150 probably for a decent resin 3D printer. Now the cure and wash stations that you will need to go with your 3D printer, especially the cure portion, if you don't have a really good UV source at home already, like a gel nail curing lamp or the sun outside, maybe it's dark where you live, and it's hard to cure resin outside, so a UV source like a cure and wash station is great. The cure and wash station lets you put the print in it after, and it rotates it, and it'll cure it with UV light, and obviously it is a wash, and that's something we're going to be talking about in a second. So just the cost of those two devices, you're probably looking at, let's be generous, $200 to $250 for a resin printer, and about the same really for a cure and wash. So a package deal, you're walking away with a printer and you're walking with a cure and wash for about $500. On top of that cost, you're going to also need to buy a few things. So keep in mind, we're at about $500 right now. And resin printing requires that you have a cleaning solution. So that's an ongoing cost. You're going to have to keep buying it. Resin by the liter in Canada, you get a good deal for around $35 to $45 for a liter, which is very, very close to the cost of a kilogram of filament. So I'm not worried about counting that cost difference right now. But what we do have to worry about is storage and other issues with resin. So now that we know that the resin printer costs about $500, what are the consumables costing? And I don't mean resin, I mean all the other parts. You have a wash and cure station. Well, you're going to need to fill the vat of the wash and cure, and that's the part goes into and it baths itself. So the wash and cure usually twirls it or spins it. I have an ultrasonic cleaner that I use to clean the parts, and then I throw it in there for a quick bath, and then I can cure stuff. So that's another layer on top of that curing station. But when you're looking at doing that, the cost of the stuff that you can clean with has to be a solvent or isopropyl alcohol. Mean Green, or there's another one with green that you can get from Princess Auto here in Canada, but almost every retailer down through the States, like the big ones, Lowe's and those, will sell them too. But Mean Green, it'll cost you anywhere between $10 and $15 for a 4-liter or gallon jug. That's just the way it is. So every time you run out of that stuff, you have to spend another $10. So right now we're sitting at, $10 for that. If you get an appropriately sized bottle of isopropyl alcohol to do some washing with, that's another $30. If you're going to need gloves, and that's another $20 for a box of gloves. And you're going to need proper face protection. So if you don't wear glasses, and even if you do, you should probably have some sort of safety protection in front of your eyes. And you're going to need some sort of filtration system for respiration and a well-ventilated area. And in my case, that meant installing a new fan. So just the startup costs of resin printing, aside from the $500 for the resin printer, was probably another $250 of buying stuff. Gloves, masks. Well, right now the incident is happening worldwide, and I already had masks and gloves, so that was okay. But we still needed to buy the fan, and then I had to do the install on the fan and that whole thing. So without all of those things put together, it's not very safe to resin print, and we'll talk about safety in a second. But resin printing requires all of those things, and without them you can't really do it successfully. So one of the things is the process of resin printing. Resin printing can print highly detailed models. Like in this picture, you can see 2 minifigures, a mini cat, a bigger cat, and I have a couple normal Fdm prints in the frame just to show you kind of like the difference in sizes and what you can achieve. Now, the process behind Fdm printing is fairly simple. You slice it, you hit print, you wait for a few hours, and your model's on the build plate, and you go and you pop it off the build plate, and you take it off, and you end up with a phone stand or a benchy or whatever. It's in your hand, it's done. Resin printing. When the object finishes printing, you have to take it off the build plate, put the build plate into your wash and cure, or the object that printed into the wash and cure, all while wearing gloves, a mask, safety glasses, making sure you don't splash the resin everywhere. And then you put it in the cure and wash, let it wash it off. And once you're done that, it gets to cure for anywhere between 20 and 2 hours. 20 minutes or 2 hours. So the curing time is an additional thing you have to think about. So where you get instant almost gratification of finishing a FDM print, there's a process after the resin print. Is it terrible? No. Do you have to be careful while you do it? Yes. Resin can cause many issues with safety and breathing and autoimmune issues that you don't even know about. And that's where we're going to start talking resin safety. So I'm going to throw a word out there with safety, and with that comes the MSDS, the Material Safety Data Sheet. Now, if you've ever taken like a safety course or anything like that, you already know what that means. But basically, any chemical product you buy, including PLA filament, will have an MSDS, and these tell us exactly what we need to use them. If we need precautions, if we need barriers between us and the actual product. And I'm going to read a few off from, and I'm not going to mention exactly the resin, but it is a rapid cure resin for 3D printing. So lots of the manufacturers actually come from the same plant. So like Anycubic makes resin, Elegoo makes resin, Creality makes resin. But if you look at the sheets, actually lots of them are coming from the same place. But here's some of the precautions. So here we go. You're going to love these. Warning: causes skin irritation, causes serious eye irritation, may cause severe allergic reactions to skin, may cause respiratory irritation, harmful to aquatic life, and should be handled with care. Those are the hazard statements, and it's true. So with resin printing, once you're done with your mean green, with that wash solution, you can't just dump it down the sink. You're going to have to put it back in a container and take it to a safe disposal site where they can deal with hazardous waste. Now, the other one I touched on already, you're going to need ventilation. You're going to need to wear protection. Glasses are listed, gloves are listed, even protective clothing is listed, and face protection. And the reason they say protective clothing is because once resin is on a piece of clothing or like it soaks into something, it's almost impossible to wash it out. You can cure it so that the resin's not dangerous anymore, and that would involve basically baking whatever thing you expose to resin under a UV light. And furthermore, once it's on your clothes, it's touching your skin, so another protective layer is well worth it. Again, don't breathe it in. In fact, this MSDS says if you have prolonged exposure and are experiencing trouble breathing, you should seek medical attention. Ventilation, respirator. Now, you have to avoid contaminating your workspace. And here's a picture of my printer and my wash station and my cure station. They're all separate from each other roughly. And you can see I have it sitting on like a serving tray so that everything that touches resin can stay on that serving tray. And I don't actually like move it from one station to the next. Now, that's not to say that you won't have accidents trying to get something off the build plate that's a little stuck. It could go flying and out into the great wide open. And isopropyl alcohol is the proper thing to use to wash an area from resin, as resin is soluble. This UV resin, I should say, is soluble in isopropyl alcohol. Now, you also want to make sure, and this is the other one, that you stay away from like the vapors and make sure that your ventilation system is rated for hazardous vapors. None of this stuff is explosive by any means, but It needs to be taken care of properly. The other thing you want to make sure of is if you do get it on your skin, don't rinse it with isopropyl alcohol. You go to the sink, you use warm water and soap. The isopropyl alcohol will actually make it soluble, and then it can actually sink into your skin faster. So just soap and water, quick, rinse off. The eye protection is even more important, because if it gets in your eyes, you get to stick your eye underneath a faucet for a while and try to wash that out. If you even get it near your mouth or think you accidentally ate it, it's very poisonous, and you do need to take great precautions. Here in our province in Canada, there's a poison control line you can call, and they will tell you what to do. And it actually says call local poison control. So this stuff is actually pretty volatile. I'm just going to touch on the very, very last piece here, and that is, if inhaled, remove victim, it says the word victim, from the area and give them fresh air. If their breathing doesn't become better or they experience worsening symptoms, obviously call for emergency medical help. And we experienced this at work. We got a resin, we put it in a room that we had sealed, but we couldn't smell resin, but the vapors did get out because it was a low odor resin, and everybody in the building that we were actually working in that area had to leave, take some fresh air. We had everybody was experiencing headaches, dizziness, nausea. So and then other than that, the storage is pretty easy. You lock it up, dark place. So that's all the safety stuff. So let's answer the next question. Is resin printing for you? Well, resin printing is one of those things that I never thought I would get into. And one morning I took a trip. An innocent trip, mind you, to Calgary. And I got a text from my wife on the way up that said, hey, we should try this. It might be cool. My wife is a crafty person herself, and she's getting into epoxy resin. So it's actually very adjacent to all the safety procedures and protocols with this. So I got into resin. But is it for you? Well, if after hearing all of that, you're like, yeah, I can do that. I can keep there's just a few basic rules, right? Clean workstation. I can do that. I can wear gloves. I have a mask. I have a well-ventilated area, and I'm responsible enough to make sure that I'm not dumping it everywhere and making a mess. And I mean, resin printing is amazing. My friend has been resin printing longer than us, Vince, and he has produced some of the miniatures for some of the board games we often play. Now, here's an example of some of the prints that have come up his, and then I recently started printing, and I'm learning some of the ropes still, but here's some models of some cats that I did, and you can see there's a big one, there's a small one. I did a few models from some TV shows, but you can kind of see a motif here, and that is nothing's really bigger than about 180 centimeters tall, 180 millimeters, right? I shouldn't say centimeters, that's freakishly huge. 18 centimeters. So nothing's really that big. Now resin printing, right now you're limited by the screen size and the cure depth, and so it doesn't get very large, and it doesn't get to be as big as some of the FDM prints. So if you need size in your print, then you're probably not well suited for resin printing. However, if you're like 90% of us, and the majority of your prints are things, like this little tiny wheel that clips onto another little tiny wheel that is separated by a little tiny spoke, and it articulates. You could print that easily on resin. There is enough space on a resin printer to do this, and it will do it great. And the strength factor is there with some resins. With some resins, they're brittle. It's just like printing with a FDM printer. Pick the material for the job. So if you're printing stuff that's not super large, you like the idea of high optical resolution, so you can get rid of those layer lines, you can print miniatures, you can print mechanical parts, then yeah, resin printing is for you. Resin printing is tried, true, tested. It's just you have to be ready to follow those few safety things. Now, there's going to be a follow-up video to this, because whenever I start a video, I think, man, this is going to be short, but it's not. So I'm going to follow up this video with a little bit of slicing for beginners and what you need to know about getting your models ready but it's important to know that it's not that dissimilar from what you have done if you've already been 3D printing with a FDM printer. The learning curve isn't huge. So I'm going to be coming out with that video next week. So this week, and I hope you enjoyed this one. If you made it this far, you guys are great. Like, subscribe, share. We do have a Patreon. We have Patreon live streams every month, at least once a month, and we do regular live streams just hanging out almost every week. So stick around. Remember the contest. Check out www.3dmakeit. And until next time, like, share, subscribe, and check out Patreon. You guys are great. Have a good one.